July of 1918, 30 British prisoners of the German Halsbanden camp, led by Lieutenant Thomas Frank Burrell, have spent the last 8 months digging a tunnel under the fence of their prison. Armed with sharp utensils and bowls, this is only the beginning of a long journey back to home. Eventually, only 10 make it to neutral Holland alive. These 30 brave men are a fraction of defeated soldiers called prisoners of war, those who surrendered on the battlefield, those who accepted captivity over death. The idea of holding defeated soldiers hostage instead of killing them was a very honorable idea. Prisoners of war were often saluted by their captors and were to be treated with a lot of respect. Perhaps there is no better portrayal of this respect than German painter Anton van Werner's Kreisenfahnen, where a captured French soldier is allowed to kiss his wife once more before going into captivity. Additionally, the 7th article of the Hague Convention in 1907, signed by all countries with prisoners, promised them with adequate clothing, food, and shelter. Prisoners of war were able to escape the grueling dangers of trenches in a more safer, more livable condition. Some countries like Germany even began to depend on these prisoners for their economy. Why would prisoners risk their life to escape? Lieutenant Burrell describes that the Hague Convention was severely underserved.
Clothes and blankets were never changed or cleaned, and a severe lack of food plagued the prisoners. Many prisoners quickly got sick and it caught on with other soldiers. Most of us were assigned forced labor during the day, which wasn't that bad since it was a better alternative to fighting the trenches. However, as food rations began to thin for our camp, prisoners began to be classified by their work output and were given rations based on this analysis. Strong men received full rations, whereas weaker, perhaps injured ones were deprived. This got worse as the war went on. As food dwindled, rules became harsher for those who couldn't keep up with the standard of work output. With about 700 prisoners, but only 3 bedrooms in this camp, the atmosphere was very cold and damp. Our group of 30 happened to be ones who had their rations severely cut by the new policies. Because we had a lot of time in prison camps, we planned an extremely meticulous escape route. We started preparing in November 1917 and escaped on the evening of the 24th of July in 1918. We dug using spoons, sharpened cutlery, and tools stolen from the camp, and used bed slats to shore it. To think that you would dig for 8 months using only cutlery, it's hard to imagine a way you would keep going. We were able to mimic German officer uniforms, and we forged appropriate paperwork to back it up. Eventually, the hole that we dug under the fence was so small that once we went through, there was no going back. One of us spoke excellent German, so he pretended to be a guard taking us out. Another pretended to be insane to prevent suspicion. As we began our 150-kilometer walk back to Holland, often some of us were caught by German guards, so we would have to desert them to escape.
The idea of having prisoners of war in a time like World War I was, like many other aspects of the war, perfection in theory but disaster in execution. Perhaps more troubling, however, was the mental effect confinement had on captives. Many captives, sitting on the sideline as the war raged on, often had mental breakdowns which polluted the general atmosphere. There was little substance to any daily routine other than meals and labor. This dull climate, paired with a lack of space, made it almost unlivable for soldiers like Burrell, and eventually were convinced to escape these prisons. Many soldiers that stayed had mental breakdowns, and often some went insane. The psychological effects of many of these helpless prisoners sidelined from the war was evident for the rest of their lives. There are many stories that have gone unheard, many desperate soldiers who took a similar path as Burrell, but were caught en route. Prisoners of war was an idea that was echoed in future conflicts, but one that never really lived up to its expectation of perfection. No countries were able to scrape out the resources to make desirable conditions for these prisons, and rightly so, for these were total wars that drained their economies dry. However, these suffering prisoners are the forgotten heroes of the Great War. Whether dressed as a German guard fleeing across the plains or ducking behind the barbed wire of trenches, each soldier, in and outside of these walls, did what they could in the best of their ability to serve their country.